out of your way to harass the user in question. Also, note that this channel is based off satirical humor. We tend to say a lot of crude things, so if you don't enjoy extremely rude humor, then we suggest you click away while you still can. Thank you.
Requests are closed. If you know that requests are closed, please do not send us in your requests so we have it for when we open them again. Please wait till we make an announcement saying requests are open. Thank you.
Hello everyone, I'm Muffin.
And I'm Dingo.
And today it's just gonna be Dingo and I. We decided to do the script by ourselves. So, because, Yuji's been doing some things by herself, I've been doing some things by myself, so we decided, let's just do this us for today. So, we hope you enjoy. So, this OC is called Crimson Blood. We received this from someone on Quotive. Link will be in the description to go read that. There isn't really a picture, or anything. It's just a long bio, which you'll see when we get into it. It's very long, so sit back and enjoy the ride, I guess.
This is set in an alternate universe. In 2065, the Third World War was unleashed, reaping the lives of many civilians across the world. In an attempt to protect their own societies, scientists of different nations conspired against each other in order to develop their own human weapons. In result, hundreds of people were taken and underwent trials of torturous experiments. Many died for the cause in vain, having no success at all.
I don't think you need to add this last part, having no success at all. That's what in vain means.
Rather than eliminating their test subjects, a few of the scientists released their captives who went along with their daily miserable lives. It wasn't until 2068, a year after the war ended, the outbreaks of mysterious illnesses and murders across the world came into light. Witnesses reported people with red eyes who seemed to suddenly freak out and wreak havoc upon people.
And you mean wreck, and it's spelled like W-R-E-A-K, not reek.
Well, not anything inherently wrong with it. People turning evil having red eyes is pretty cliché. The phenomenon was called the Crimson Wave. The sources of chaos were soon discovered and killed.
I think this is a pretty big jump from being in the middle of the war with scientists experimenting on humans to all of a sudden the war is ended. I'd like you to slow down and go into more detail on the war.
Even after the elimination of the core test subjects, there were more reported sightings and destruction of red-eyed beings with power. Rather than being related by blood or infected with the body fluids of the test subjects, it was the exposure of chemicals in the air radiating from the original test subjects. This was what caused new ability users to form.
This is interesting. If written right, I think it could work, but it does seem a bit unlikely to happen.
The hunt of ability users were initiated from regular humans who saw them as a threat, whereas the government strives to collect the ability users and train them for their own devices. However, both sides have lacked results from their resolves, even during the Fourth World War.
A Fourth World War? I'm finding it a bit hard to keep track of the timeline in the story. How much time passes between the Third War and the Fourth War? What happens between those? It's not just like, there's peace in the land and absolutely nothing happened between wars. Something happened to cause each one.
I'm actually curious as to why these world wars are happening. Is it Germany related again, or does it involve other countries this time? A new threat has risen. A small gang consisting of ability users have named themselves as Voiceber. Rather than protecting fellow ability users, they serve to eliminate their fellow people on their own. The governments of the world in return have launched their hunt for the collection of ability users before Voiceber can get to them.
Hopefully you explain in here why these ability users are targeting their own kind.
Through the midst of this, there is an organization who seeks to hide themselves until calamity has been stopped. Antebellum, a home to ability users within the province of Crimson, a city located on the outskirts of Las Vegas. A refugee city for civilians of Kansan to join with their ally, the Republic of Cyrex. You're running, but with the government and Voiceber on your tail, will you choose to join them, or will you seek the sanctuary of Antebellum?
I wanted to save my comment on this until the end of this little chunk of backstory. While I did enjoy the small amount of backstory you have here, minus a few things I pointed out here and there, as you've all heard me say in other videos, I personally prefer when the backstory is saved until the end so I can learn about your character before being thrown into their story.
What's with the sudden perspective change? It went from a more neutral, third-person-esque perspective to suddenly including the reader? I can understand this is a choose-your-own-adventure book or a role-playing prompt, but this is a bloody bio.
Name: Finnegan, Artegal, Cearbhall. A pronunciation for the middle and last name would be nice. Finnegan is a masculine name that stems from the Irish language, directly translating to fair. The reason his name was bestowed upon him by his parents wasn't due to the meaning behind the name, but rather the melodic way it flows from the tongue. Despite his persistent attempts to get people to simply refer to him by a shorter variation of his name, Finn, some choose to simply call him by his full name, whether he likes it or not. It's gotten to the point where he refuses to introduce himself by his actual name instead of
Shouldn't be here. That would imply he doesn't say the shorter name.
Saying the shorter nickname during introductions. Artegal is a masculine name that stems from the Irish language, directly translating to high valor. It's rather unusual to hear, but Finn himself has taken more of a liking to his name than his actual one. He doesn't introduce himself to people by his middle name, as it gives him a rather pompous first impression, and he finds no use for giving others a false opinion of himself. It's far too aristocratic sounding for a simple merry man such as him. Cearbhall, I think it's pronounced, is the family name that stems from the Irish language, directly translating to hacking. Finn commonly gets asked if he's somehow related to late Irish President Cearbhall O'Donoghue. I don't know how to pronounce names. Which in itself is a rather foolish question due to Cearbhall not being the late president's last name. Even so, the foolish question has been asked so many times, the male has completely given up on introducing himself by his last name. It saves him heaps of trouble, and most of the time, no one bothers to ask in the first place.
He already sounds like a lovely fellow that I don't have urges to punch already. Nicknames. Finnegan isn't too fond of nicknames that serve no purpose other than take a jab at his name, and often holds a distaste for the creators of the nicknames. Finn, by mostly everyone. This is one of the only nicknames he tolerates, being that he was originally the creator of it. Like many other Irish names, Finnegan isn't the simplest to pronounce, and only a small majority actually manage to properly enunciate his name. Finn is a more simple variation of his name, every syllable uncomplicated and far shorter than his original name. Whenever others attempt to nickname him foolish things, he only chooses to aggressively warn them that this is the only acceptable shortened variation of his name, and that if they choose to continue referring to him as anything other than so, there will be consequences and repercussions. It's not anger issues, Mom.
Are you sure? A normal person really doesn't react this way. It sounds like anger issues to me.
Finnegas by friends. When it comes to creating crude nicknames, his friends took the cake. It isn't easy to create a slur from his name despite its length, but his friends had always managed to substitute bits of his name and create rather vulgar insults. The nicknames continue to become more indecent the more he asks politely to bring a stop to the obscene taunts, to the point where he'd learn to ignore them and carry on with his daily routine, visualizing that they still call him by his genuine name rather than their risque nicknames. While he is no man with the patience of a saint, he wouldn't be so foolish as to lash out at the only people that chose to hang around him, other than Mume, or Mumai. Now that he's older, he regrets ignoring their crude nicknames, and would absolutely murder anyone who dared to call him something such as this. I dislike this guy more and more, each and every single second. Finny by Mumai, a special little nickname that formed thanks to Mumai, or Mume. She used to call him by his full name Finnegan, but as they grew closer she started to realize that she was more comfortable with being around him, and thus the nickname was created, mostly on a whim. She was different from the norm and decided to come up with a new nickname for her friend. The main reason was because she wanted to leave some mark that she was there in his life. That may sound stupid, but she was a young child, so let's cut her some slack. Finny is a nickname that Mumai gave to him, and he cherishes it dearly. So if anyone calls him by that nickname, well, let's just say that all does not end well for them. Man, I wonder what's going to happen. Oh, he's such a regular individual. I bet he likes to read books like a normal person.
And you say he doesn't have anger issues? Age. To his knowledge, he's either 20 or 21 years of age. It's not like he's very good at counting, but he's pretty sure he's 20. Nationality. He's an Irishman. If the name or slang didn't give it away already. Oh, it did, and you've said he's Irish already, so just say Irish. Ethnicity. Ukrainian, though one would have never guessed based on his looks and first impressions alone. Date of birth. Over the countless years of existence. Except it's not countless because you literally just said he was around his early 20s. Finn has had far better things to do than to contemplate his date of birth. The male's completely forgotten it by now, but if he had decimated, it would be somewhere between February 22nd and March 2nd. It doesn't matter anyway, he never celebrates it. Astrological sign. The balance. And throughout this bio, they have a lot of little links. There's a link here to a GIF, which I will show you, but frankly, I don't think these GIFs are needed. Since your bio is, for a little bio, it might spice things up, but since your bio is already so long that by the end of this, Dingo and I both got really tired reading it, all these little links are just not needed, and they're kind of annoying, honestly, in our opinion. But anyway, the balance. Libra.
Gender. He's a male as far as he knows. Later on you mention a lot of really masculine traits, so I'm very sure the last part is pointless. He doesn't exactly seem the type to down his gender identity and more so care about other things. I mean, it's true, people can choose to, identify as what they want and all that, but there's not anything talking about him, being confused or anything, so I don't get it. Appearance. Waking up alone like a man that failed.
So there are 3 links here for appearances. I'm not sure why you put these in your bio. Also, they don't really match with some of the description you give for him anyway.
Everything about Finnegan is pure, as his mother would say. It is as if he is a blooming snowdrop amongst the wilting flowers. His complexion is colorless, akin to that of a deceased individual, and not a single blemish nor scar decorates his skin. His hair is a flawless shade of midnight indigo.
His hair is purple?
Actually, midnight indigo is more so a blue color. Additionally, I think crimson blood's an anime, and in anime, hair colors are kinda weird like that. Delightfully velvety to the core, and a texture sleek enough to slip through your fingers like satin. It's almost impossible to overlook his presence within a crowd, the blueberry tint of his hair often attracting much attention despite his own best efforts to keep low amongst the civilians. The hue of his doe eyes is undeniably similar to the color of his hair, but appears as more of a light sapphire with tinges of red decorating his dilated irises, that are only further accented by his complexion and long, thick eyelashes.
I'm going to be honest, I'm not sure how I feel about these looks. This is some wild main character of an anime type stuff, which isn't terrible, but just all of that put into one character gives it a little bit of super specialness that no one really likes.
The structure of his face is rather petite, plump, bow-shaped lips, a pale shade of rose, a small turn-up nose that suits him well, high cheekbones for an aristocratic look, 2 dimples on either side of his cheeks, a baby face that gives him a much younger appearance, and arched eyebrows that give a more friendly and approachable appearance. A below-average height of 5'3" only adds to his fragile image, but the sinister smile constantly etched on his expression gives him a more haunting beauty than an air of purity and innocence. While it may not be something expected from him, his figure is of rather impressive standard. A 6-pack sculpted onto his abdomen, both his developed biceps and calves never fail to make the ladies swoon. Well, when his baggy choice of attire doesn't cover up his defined muscles. If one were to glance down at his private areas, well, both sides are rather large.
1, I don't feel as if this information was necessary, and 2, this is really giving your character too much. His hair and eyes are a special color, he's buff and handsome, and both sides of him are large. I don't feel like we need to know that.
During the activation of his abilities, there isn't much change other than a shift in eye color, going from a royal blue to a deep shade of crimson, and his hair darkening a hue or two into an almost raven black tint.
and his eyes and hair change color. The eye color changing I might let you get away with since he was given abilities, but especially with the hair color change on top of everything else you've given him, it's making this character seem too super special.
When it comes to his core, his orbs dilate to the point where it seems like he almost has aniridia.
For those of you that don't know what this is, here's an example. Fair warning. It looks very creepy.
He becomes surrounded by dark intent, and his hair stands on its tip, almost as if he was a cat puffing out his hair in an attempt to declare supreme superiority over the weaker kittens and senior elderly cats.
Honestly, there's a lot I can say about this character's appearance, but since I don't want to continue stopping this video to point out the flaws I found, I'm just going to save any more ranting about this looks for the final thoughts.
This is the longest pile for appearance I've ever read in my entire life. And I've read joke OCs. I'm not going to repeat what Muffin's already said, but I agree with her.
Attire.
Why are there moons here? I mean, I think these are links to different clothings, but why are they moons?
Yup, each moon links to a different picture of a man wearing some kind of fancy suit. I really don't think all of that is needed, especially because for his profession, I wouldn't see him having money for all that extravagance. But anyway, Finnegan has a taste for formal clothing, created personally by the finest of tailors, and made from the most superlative material in sight. I'm going to consider this section as part of his appearance, so most of the comments here will also be left to then. Just know that I have a problem with this. Suits are his aesthetic, and he's never seen wearing anything other than the raiment willingly. Trench coats are also always an option, as he finds them to go pleasantly hand in hand with his trademark finery. It is a rather common occurrence to see the male fuss about the simplest details of his outfit, and refusing to exit his accommodation if even the slightest stain appears on his apparel. Rather than the standard monochrome hues suits provide, he takes more of a liking towards rich and vibrant shades, enjoying more of a variety than the usual basic colors. Unfortunately, due to the flamboyant attention his suits attract, he isn't often allowed to wear his attire of choice and is left using the minimal amount of casual clothing littered across the bottom of his wardrobe. When it comes to his choice of informal, everyday wear, Finn becomes far more critical, attempting to find faults in anything to get an excuse from wearing the darned things. Beanies, sweater, jeans, sunglasses, any clothing that can be considered fashionable while still keeping his profile low and letting him blend into a crowd of civilians. His color palette also changes, though not drastically. Rather, he keeps the same vivid and striking shades, but lighter variations of them. Light yet still warm hues are what he finds to work well with him, and often garners the least attention amongst passerbys. Due to having a shortage of decent clothing, he's left repeatedly clothing himself with the same outfits, and with his judgmental attitude, that means he's often spent years at his basin scrubbing at the slightest of blemishes and wasting a month's worth of water on his unruly ways. But you just said he spends a ton of money on suits. So maybe if he stopped spending a ton of money on these fancy suits that he couldn't even wear anyway because he's supposed to be keeping a low profile, he wouldn't have a shortage of what you call decent clothing. Also, I'm a bit confused, which is another reason why the backstory should be left for the end. From the chunk of backstory you've given us, it seems like the people with abilities are still hated in most societies. You talk about how the people took it in their own hands to hunt these people down, even if the government seemed okay with them, and how even other people with abilities hunted each other down too. His style seems a bit bright and flamboyant for someone who would be disrespected at the least, but hunted at the most for his abilities. To me, it just doesn't make sense that he's not lying low. And you can say all you want, oh, this is lying low, he's, look what I gave for his casual clothing. That is not lying low. Perhaps you clear things up more later in the bio if you put more of a backstory, but this is just another reason why most times it's best to save all that for the end. That way, we don't get this confusion.
Sexual orientation. Demisexual biromantic. Occupation. Scam artist.
There's a link for scam artist, which just shows a gif of an anime character grinning. Again, not needed, a lot excessive for the length of this bio.
Finnegan's profession isn't the most moral one, as to earn himself a living he must scrape for even the slightest glimmer of hope. His unethical choice of career is the life of a scam artist. A rather odd choice, as he isn't the most confident nor outspoken individual you might meet. Anything ranging from fox mystical items that are said to have healing properties, to magic shows that charge fortunes from wealthy businessmen, only to be disappointed when he refuses to show any trickery. The furious mobs that follow after he's introduced his business to the town often force him to evacuate from the area, constantly forcing him to move from location to location.
See, this confuses me even more. Why would he be so flashy and bright if he is 1, the kind of person that the public doesn't like because of his abilities, and 2, hated by many people in the towns he's come from due to his trickery? This just seems like an even more reason for him to dress darker in less fine clothes and lay low.
Wanderer.
And there is a link for Wanderer, which does not come up, so you should probably take that out. A little awkward when you have all these links and one doesn't actually work.
While many consider a wanderer to not be a career choice, Finnegan is oddly defensive about the subject, turning it into a common debate topic, and prevailing as the victor in every one of them. Though he rarely gets any pay from his tireless strolls, it's still an enjoyable practice to him, and though he is qualified enough to get a position in the profession of building and earn him even the slightest wage, the male completely throws away any opportunity to begin a healthy lifestyle, all for the sake of his imprudent thoughts of having freedom and not being tied down to any dumb job, and apparently his love for the unknown.
Affiliation. And there's a link for the Mashiburo Gang, I think it's called. But anyway, the Mashiburo Gang previously. They weren't exactly a gang per se, but more adolescents attempting to insert themselves into the world of criminals and gangsters. A group of 12 rebellious teenagers in the phase of disobeyment, attempting to release their inner sentiment and angst. Angsty teenager. Finnegan was one of the 12 delinquents, though he didn't participate much in any of their activities or efforts to fit in amongst the muggers, but had originally joined for the sole purpose of creating friendships and not endorsing himself in isolation. I want friends, and I don't want to live my life in my room, so I'll join a gang. Seems reasonable. Like, I totally bet they'd allow you in even if you don't agree to do any of their gang-like stuff, because, gangs do that all the time. It was where a large portion of his personality was shaped and crafted, their cruelty eventually rubbing off on him in an unbelievably negative way. Even with their merciless ways and the inhumane torture they cast towards him, he still considers them his friends, as they have so far been the only individuals to have shown even the slightest sliver of kindness to him.
Inhumane torture and sliver of kindness should not be in the same sentence.
Not including his childhood friend Mumai? I don't know how to pronounce that. Of course, while the 12 rebels could basically be considered wannabes by the rest of society, yeah. Their methods of abuse and torment were the highest of quality, top-notch. Both their trash talks and their ability to back it up. Of course, Finn was oftentimes used as their personal training dummy, their test subject, and their punching bag, and experienced over 3/4 of all the immoral deeds, every single last insult and every single last scar that still marks his body. Hold up! Let's go back to the appearance section really quickly. I have something I think we should read. His complexion is colorless, akin to that of a deceased individual, and not a single blemish nor scar decorates his skin. He doesn't have any scars on him, yet here you say he experienced over 3/4 of all their immortal deeds, every single last insult and every single last scar that still marks his body. Also, earlier you described him as pure, but the longer this bio goes on, the more I see that it's almost the exact opposite. You need to decide, is this boy going to be pure and beautiful, or is he going to be a scarred up thug? Describing him as both is confusing, and it doesn't work well. Eventually, the male was forced to leave, later kicking him out from their clique once they noticed his lack of interest. He had a lack of interest from the start! How did they not notice that until now? In their goals and the minimal amount of contribution he's kindly provided to their league. Looking back on his childhood, he's honestly glad that he was sent out. He didn't want to live in such a disgusting lifestyle anyway.
If you ask me, it seems like he's still fairly disgusting.
None currently. Okay, so you're saying he doesn't have an affiliation right now. I don't see why that needs a quote or a link or anything next to it. You can just say that he's not affiliated right now. But anyway, none currently. I am quiet, but I am not blind. Groups and affiliations are made for those who cannot survive on their own. Position. He's rank 2 Vermilion. What is a Vermilion? From what I haven't been able to find anything on a Vermilion. I would like explanation. Special ability. Unbrachinesis? I think I'm spelling it. Unbrachinesis. Oh, I love this anime. Oh, okay, I can understand that if this is the power you've given your character. I understand that a lot more now. I love that anime. Users of Unbrachinesis, also known to many as darkness manipulation, have the power to bend, shift, or transform both darkness and shadows into anything in their liking. The ability is able to both counter and be countered by photokinesis. Okay, so this power I really don't mind, mostly because it's one of my favorite powers, as long as you don't make him too overpowered. If this section is anything like the other sections, though, I have little hope for that. And also, it's been a long time since I watched the anime that the GIF you linked here is from, but that, from what I remember from that anime, that's not exactly what that guy does. So I'm confused about why you linked a picture to, not a picture, a GIF to that showing off the power, when, as far as I know, that's not exactly how his power goes. Each user focuses on a different aspect of their powers, acting slightly like a sub-power to the already existing ability and becoming their main method of attack. They still focus on improving other minor attributes of the ability, such as night vision, darkening brightly locations, and moving the shadows of other people, but not quite like the vigorous training they undergo to even slightly enhance their sub-power. Each sub-power is unique, but the only current individual harboring Unbrachinesis holds a distinctive ability, Shadow Marionette. Wait, so he has the basic shadow power of Unbrachinesis, but also has an ability with that called Shadow Marionette? This definitely feels too overpowered already, unless you explain it a little bit more. Shadow Marionette is a skill that focuses more on the shadow element rather than the darkness. It allows the user to attach their own shadow onto that of their opponents, forcing them to copy every one of their movements, exactly as if their contender were to be a marionette doll. The grip lasts for 5 minutes, and while the foe still has their consciousness and is able to speak freely, his movements are restricted to those of the user's choosing. The user may extend their shadow further away from the opponent, which takes more energy and far more training, and then they also come closer to the adversary, with them still not able to do a single thing about it. Another crucial point to bringing this up is the time of day. Depending on whether it's dusk or dawn, the stronger the control of the foe is. If it's bright and the sun is shining, the grip on the opponent will be powerful, while it becomes the opposite during the darkness and misty areas. The ability has heavy drawbacks, weariness and dizziness, a common occurrence, sometimes even going further to the point where the user falls into a comatose. Even with these drawbacks, it still feels a bit overpowered. I mean, the grip lasts for 5 minutes, with no apparent way for the person to break out of it, and during those 5 minutes, you can make them do anything. The fact that they still can stay conscious and speak their own doesn't change the fact that this is a big power.
You do realize how bloody easy it is to heal yourself if you're not scared to, right? Like, it's really easy if you don't have people trying to stop you and you're not scared. This guy could kill anyone in under a minute by just having them, like, break their own neck or something similar.
To polish his ability, the user is forced to go through strict training regimen, developing a seriously fit figure in the process due to intensity. A morning lap of 1 kilometer at the very least, followed by an exercise till you drop to burn off any weight gained during the span of the previous day. A diet of countless amounts of carbohydrates and meat, anything to keep its energy at its highest peak for the rest of the day, and repeat the same process at dusk. No explanation as to why they have to go through that training. To me, it would make more sense for the user to need to train their mind regularly, not their body. This physical training that they go through doesn't sound like it would do much to actually help strengthen their power. It seems like this is just a way for you to explain why your character needs to be buff, and I don't think it works. Also, who is forcing him to do these things? Did he just decide, okay, I need to do these things to harness my power? Or did someone meet him and say, hey, I recognize that power, here's what you need to do to make it good? Or did he join a league and they were all like, we have the same power, here's what you do? You didn't explain any of this in the short backstory you have, so it's very confused as to who taught him all this, who's making him do all this. Did he decide it himself? I'm so confused.
Weapon of choice. Finnegan doesn't often go for weapons, but rather he enjoys finding creative ways of executing and eliminating his victims without getting himself harmed in the process, as his actions are connected to his opponents, and every single one of his movements is copied by his foe.
I don't think I'd agree with you giving him a weapon anyway. With all the powers he has and his strength, the addition of weapon is a bit too much. He doesn't need it.
If he had to choose, though, it would most certainly be something inconspicuous. Not a noticeable weapon where it would be simple to tell he was aiming to murder his opponent, but something that could go rather undetected by even the sharpest eye until the last moment. Something like hidden blades would suit him perfectly. He always carries a ransom, hidden beneath his long sleeves and able to slice the neck of anyone within a split second.
You just said earlier that he doesn't often carry weapons. Does he have weapons? Or doesn't he?
Despite the years of experience he's had of some, he hasn't managed to find a way to stop the blades from slicing into his skin, often leaving him with numerous scars plastered across his wrists. Weaknesses.
And then there is a link for abandonment.
Abandonment. Due to past occurrences, the experience of abandonment has left him scarred and become one of his biggest weaknesses. Even if he isn't a vivid fan for social interaction, it comforts him to be around other individuals, and when he is left isolated in an empty room with nothing to entertain himself with, and a tense atmosphere, it triggers a breakdown. One that lasts for over an hour depending on how much his mood factors into it.
That was a really long sentence. You could break it by saying, even if he isn't a vivid fan of social interaction, comma, it comforts him to be around others, period. When he is left isolated in a tense atmosphere with nothing to entertain himself, it triggers mental breakdown, comma, one that lasts for over an hour depending on how his mood factors into it.
This is mainly due to a moment shared with a childhood friend by the name of Mume, who he deserted to save his own soul. Education.
There's a link for education, which again, we all know what education is, so things like that we don't need to see a link for.
Why? That is so unnecessary! It's
know!
just a paper with a guy fiddling with a pencil!
I know!
Fuck! Okay, I'm done. I'm sorry.
A rather obvious flaw, he's not known for his intelligence or knowledgeable plans. An unsatisfactory childhood has left him with no skill other than communication and rusty writing skills.
Except those aren't the only skills he has, because he also needs to have some people skills in order to con people like he does, and have solid manipulation skills.
The male is barely able to add together numbers, never mind become a mathematician with the flick of his finger. It's the main reason he lacks a stable job that provides decent income, and is forced to keep up his unprincipled choice of profession. Not that he pays any heed to that, he's got better things to do than tie himself down to idiotic careers. You can't be dumb and be a successful con artist. You just can't. Sure, if you're only conning something that isn't very intelligent, such as like maybe 5-year-olds, maybe you can get away with it. But you said he cons business owners. Most people who run successful businesses are very intelligent, or at the very least understand how con artists work. Fire. It's understandable that Finnegan will have a fear of fires, his mother having been burned to her death by the wicked flames. Though it might seem like a simple aversion, the male doesn't take it lightly. Even the slightest flicker of a torch is able to trigger him into a frenzy. It's not as if you can blame the poor child for the murder of his mother figure, nor is it possible to blame him for developing a vivid horror of seeing the blaze. His reflection. While it may seem rather foolish in the eyes of others, his disgust for his own reflection is certainly real, as he feels it shows beneath his facade, the true monster that lies beneath his masquerade. It's the main reason no mirrors populate his apartment complex, and even if they had been built in beforehand, Finnegan would always manage to smash them in his moments of outrage. Anything that mirrors his image is always found destroyed into the minimalist of pieces, and due to this vapid fear, he no longer remembers his own appearance.
Yet he cares so much for his appearance, dressing in fine things, or at least dressing in flashy clothes when he's going casual. That feels a bit contradictory to the fact that he hates looking at his appearance, though. Like you said earlier, he spends so much time over every last little detail of his outfit and his looks. Why would he do that if he doesn't care about his appearance?
Insensitive. This makes sense. Insensitive. Finnegan is never perceived as a man who would connect and relate to the emotions of others, and are most certainly right. He was raised to be uncaring of people's feelings, constantly being told that if he stopped to help others and their sentiments, he would only end up being dragged behind and never move forward towards his goals. He isn't able to experience emotions either, as he was never taught anything other than pain and anger, so he isn't able to correlate with others. Social interaction. Finn is not a man who enjoys attention.
I also feel like this is contradictory to his clothing and his choice of job. Getting attention from people in order to then con them out of their money is literally his job.
And would never even attempt to dream of being a man of the glamour and spotlight. While he finds it comforting to be in the presence of others, it simply seems out of character for him to be the main star of the show, socializing with everyone he lays eyes on. Rather, he prefers to simply relax among the sidelines and savor the sweet bliss provided by the lively atmosphere of the place, keeping out of the view of every social butterfly. Fighting. Despite being a user of a dangerous ability, he really isn't the greatest when it comes to battle. The male finds more amusement from simply toying around with the powers of Umbra-Kinesis given to him, linking his shadow to the one of his opponents and forcing them to execute various foolish actions. Due to this, his fighting ability isn't as powerful as the previous users of Umbra-Kinesis, but his skill in controlling his ability is of the highest caliber. He still has his hidden tricks scattered across his body, so he is able to fight without the use of his abilities.
I think I'd be more okay with the fact that he's okay at fighting but isn't great at it if he didn't literally train his body every day like you said previously. You've given him the training and the muscles and then of course the power too. It just doesn't make much sense he's not good at fighting with those muscles and the training you said he goes through.
Intolerant.
I feel like most of this can be moved to the category of intensive. The second half of this paragraph doesn't really even feel like it fits with intolerant.
If there's one thing everyone's aware of, even on simply first impressions, is that his patience is unbelievably low. He has no use for futile things, and anyone who even dares to suggest a half-witted idea to him is in for an extremely harsh reality check. His temper is so narrow, the slightest actions can throw him into an outrage. His appearance might appear approachable and friendly to some, but he's a terrifying man able to do things you'd never expect from someone like him. So he's like a Shota that's terrifying and he slits his own wrist by accident. Okay. This guy is a lot edgier than I even realized. I thought he was edgy before. Anyways, Mumai, his greatest weakness and his only motivation left. The male is completely done with everything, having lived his life to the fullest. Only one thing still nags at the back of his mind, the need to fulfill his promise and reunite once more with his old, childhood, non-related sister. It's the only reason he still falls asleep every night, the one reason he bothers. Of course, that was a past thought. Through the male's travels, he's managed to come across some delightful things, writing each one down on his bucket list to do once he manages to find Mumai. He'd gladly give up his life for her.
Okay, so you say he really feels no other emotion other than anger and such, but you describe this girl like he loves her. I think it's obvious he's actually able to feel some other emotions, which just confuses me even more.
Also, didn't you say he abandoned her to save himself? Wouldn't that imply she's kind of dead, or at the very least badly injured?
Love interest, and there's a link that says, "Thank you for loving me even though I still tasted of heartache and war." The male's completely clueless. He's never been taught about anything even corresponding to love. He's been on the search for his unrelated sister for years. He hasn't stopped to learn of the cycle of romance. Relatives. Rosen, Aofe, Cearbhall? Please give a pronunciation to that name. I can't pronounce any of it. Finnegan and Rosen's chemistry together was decent, even despite her insanity. Finnegan still managed to connect to her slightly like son and mother should. It only made her death an even worse experience for him, as the minimal memories they've shared together over the first few years of his life had still managed to make a huge impact, and he'd be lying if he denied that he nearly went down the path of madness after execution. Something like that should be in your backstory. It should be a critical part of your backstory, and we didn't hear any of it! I'm leaving to end the video!
Wow, Buffett is getting real upsetting spaghetti from this.
following the footsteps of the rest of his family. Between his father and his mother, Finn would most certainly save his father. No hesitate. What? But we haven't heard anything of his father yet, and it seems like you really loved your mother. Why would he save his father? That's such a weird switch. Be like, he loved his mother. He went down the hole of insanity after she died, but he'd save his father for sure. Wouldn't give two shits about his mother.
Mother, I went insane for you, but fuck you, I like Dad more.
Her obsession with the thought that everyone around her practiced Satanism was simply an obstacle in the way of their bond. I am so confused. And there's a link for Aiden Eugene Cearbhall, I think I pronounced that right. While he may have an unbreakable bond with his mother even after her tragic death, he and his father don't get along. Why? Why would you certainly save your father then if you and your father don't even get along? And if one wanted to take a further look, you'd find that they don't fare well together in the slightest. The psychotic ways of his father absolutely terrify him, and they don't spend less than a minute within the same room. It didn't pain him in the slightest to slaughter his father figure at the time of his childhood, but it often calmly comes to haunt him in the present. His murderous tendencies and broken mind didn't excuse him from his duties as the only guardian left in the household, and despite isolating himself and drawing with the blood of his victims, he still provided everyone with food even if it had already rotted and became spoiled. It showed that the man still had some decency. No! It's not decent to provide you can't go, well, at least it's food even though it's rotten and spoiled. No, that's not decent. You're giving us rotten and spoiled food. There's nothing good about that.
Killing your own parent is a trope that I hate, but I guess since Finn seems to be portrayed as a huge prick anyways, it's kind of fine.
Connor, Aeneas, Cearbhall, I would like pronunciation of that middle name. If there's one family member Finnegan has absolutely no regrets executing, even to this very present day, it would be his older brother, Connor. He was a man sickening to the very core. Someone who would gladly murder others for the sake of wealth, only to then have the audacity to brag about the same wealth in front of the faces of the poor, money earned from the death of someone no less. It doesn't help that the man had brutally murdered his twin sister, the only other sane person with the concept of common sense and decency. Connor could never have atoned for his sins. Not even after a millennium would he become pure. It was only right to kill a man as cruel as him, almost like a twisted sense of justice had been served. He only executed the man out of self-defense in the first place, not as if he slaughtered the man for entertainment. Seriously, there is not one good person in his household besides his unrelated sister?
Ah yes, the classic trope of abusive family members, meant to make us sympathize more of him, right? It doesn't work if he's just as bad as they are.
Dwayne, Ernan, Cearbhall. Finnegan and Dwayne are rather iffy with each other, neither of them having trusted one another or even bothered to communicate with the other, each separately focusing on their own lives and their own problems. The attack on his sister was most certainly unprovoked, a more spontaneous thing, but it tripped the scale into a complete red zone, an immense hatred for each other to the point where they could be considered rivals, opponents even. He has slight guilt about killing his brother, but is mostly fine with it considering it payback for the slaughter of his twin sister. Wait, so both brothers helped slaughter his twin sister? Why did we not hear about any of this in the little backstory you gave? That's very confusing. On the topic of his brother, the male once commented, if he wasn't such a fucking dumbass, we could have maybe been actual brothers. An honest summary of his view of his brother, in Finnegan's opinion, Dwayne was far better than Connor. Signhead Colin Cearbhall, his twin sister, and definitely the light that supported his darkness all the way through. She was the only one who didn't get affected by the death of her mother due to not having a strong tie with her and being more mere acquaintances than actual mother and daughter. Most certainly the life of the Damp household, she attempted to snap everyone out of their trance of depression, only succeeding in awakening Finnegan for what he is eternally grateful. He, by far, feels most guilty and responsible for her death, barely managing to pull through another phase of melancholy without her guidance. She was the only family member that actually made him feel like family, actually made him feel alive and homely. She did not deserve to die, in no way did she deserve it. Her kindness and vivacious attitude will never be forgotten by him. Did he almost kill all of his family? I thought this guy was supposed to be pure.
The only thing he's pure at is being a pure psychopath. Woohoo! Allies! Mumai. Mumai has been his only true friend for most of his years. His only motivation over the years to continue wandering across the earth in search of his fellow childhood companion. It's almost like an excuse for him, really, to continue his unofficial profession in traveling the world for a minimal pay of $1 from civilian passerbys that assume he's a homeless man. He does actually miss her dearly, hoping to not have the promise he's made become empty nothingness and hoping to once more be able to laugh alongside her. He hopes that the countless stories he has racked up over his travels don't go untold and reach her ears, and that he can view her facial features and how much she's matured over the years before he succumbs to the will of death. The male would never forgive himself, not in an eternity of lifetimes, if he died before he met her. Enemies, to be decided.
If he doesn't have any enemies, then for now I think you can just delete this section. I personally hate seeing empty sections. Although, he's pissed off enough people in towns that he's been through that surely he's made an enemy or two.
I'm not a man of no sin. I have more enemies than one would think.
Personality. An idolist. There is one an idolist. Dreamer. Finnegan is a man of many ideas, thoughts constantly overflowing with artistic images and impossible possibilities. He enjoys isolating himself within a room of tranquility with only the fan's light humming and a newspaper in his hand as he inquires about questions philosophers wouldn't even dream of.
You said he wasn't intelligent. Not just isn't book smart, you specifically said he wasn't intelligent. Philosophy is kind of an intelligent thing.
Rather than leaving his household before the thunderous roaring of partygoers and the deafening music that a club provides, as well as the overexpensive alcohol supplied by the bar. Didn't you say several times before that he hates isolation, though? I understand that this is a better kind of isolation, but still, isolation is, in the end, isolation. The male rarely speaks his thoughts out into the open and is more of an avid listener than one who would take on the toll of the spotlight. Of course, that doesn't mean that he has no talent when it comes to communicating, but rather an exact opposite. He is able to charm and woo an entire crowd with the warmth and passion that goes into each word, and the motivation he provides his audience, which fills them with both the desire and willingness to continue with their actions. See, he has people skills, which on one hand makes sense, but also doesn't because he may seem slightly antisocial. Also, he's able to woo a crowd, but this guy doesn't like to be in the spotlight. This is mainly due to his firm belief in other people, almost to the point where it could become a fault. And despite not being able to connect with the emotions of others, he has such high hopes for every single individual he happens to start small conversation with that would mentally break the other person to disappoint his inflated expectations. But social interaction is one of his weaknesses, and he's insensitive. Nothing makes sense anymore!
Why is this OC so contradiction of itself? It really just sounds like you wrote down the basic idea but decided that was good and expanded on the basic idea and not in a good way. I don't know how to describe this, but this OC is going back and forth between personalities, back and forth between looks, back and forth between everything, and it's confusing as fuck.
His opinions are unbelievably strong, and he would gladly debate anyone to advocate for his beliefs, and is often unable to be manipulated due to his insightful attitude, seeing through many lies and attempts at deceit in an attempt to create a more honest discussion between both of them. Cluelessly fierce small ball of sass. As Finnegan was never taught morals at a young age, nor having gained any experience to teach him proper communication, the male is very awkward with his words during conversations, and his words are often direct and outspoken with no thought beforehand, and rather more just whatever he chooses to spontaneously say. And yet, he can woo crowds of people with the warmth and passion that goes into what he says. Despite his ability to see through acts of trickery, he is a rather deceitful man himself, commonly avoiding certain verities in order to let the other believe different from the truth. Of course, he never actually puts the skill to use, except in his job, because he's a con man, so he literally puts the skill to use every time he does his job. As his naturally uncharismatic attitude and sharp tongue reveal far more information than needed most time, and never fails to bring individuals to tears due to his uncontrollable mouth. Questions are also part of his daily life, and Finn often takes pleasure in quizzing others about topics that simply require common knowledge, something that he absolutely does not have. Oftentimes they are rather embarrassing and personal, maybe a bit odd to some, but it's simply genuine curiosity, and the more you refuse to respond, the more he chooses to continue pestering you. He sounds like a 5-year-old trapped in a buff, young adult's body. He could also be considered sassy by people, as when asked a question holding deeper meaning, he will often answer it in a literal sense, which never fails to get him in everyone's bad books. Pickup lines and innuendos are absolutely nothing to him, as due to his still childlike innocence.
Innocence? He killed his entire family, and you call him innocent. I'm actually getting frustrated at this point. I'm sorry.
You won't be able to understand the hidden intent unless it's unbelievably obvious to the point where you scream your desire for him, which at that point the male will die from rash pigmentation, as he likes to call it, when rather it's simply blushing. How does he not have any enemies if he really acts this way? Fresh out of Mercy 24/7. While he may seem like a kind of first impressions, what does that mean? Do you mean that he may seem kind at first impressions? Because I'd say some of the stuff you've written here really contradicts that. That is merely what he considers a common courtesy, and what he expects to be returned without hesitation. Rather, the male is completely immoral, quickly irritated, and judgmental, with standards so high even perfection is unable to satisfy him. His aggressive tendencies and constant irritated attitude never make him a candidate for friendship, never mind his rusted skills in the art of relating to others, as well as comforting them in the time of need. It's uncommon to gain Finnegan's respect, as the male's constantly overly critical of even the slightest details he notices on civilians and passerbys, and those who Finn belittles never gets to speak out their opinion, as the male will always interrupt with a topic change, be able to speak to him? What does that mean? As he will only comment on their flaws before turning on his heel and speed away. Due to learning from the best, his trash talk is unmatched by anyone, and the natural talent Irishmen have when it comes to slandering only serves as an even more useful trait. Despite his temper and every one of his faults, Finnegan is a decent person. Is he though? You just said he was completely immoral! With a preference for silence and a never-ending curiosity to gain more knowledge in an attempt to fill the empty hole within his heart, meant especially for golden memories and his best times. That doesn't excuse his flaws, and while he might be a monster, it doesn't mean he's a man unable to do any good. Emotionally unattached. At this point, I feel like you're just repeating stuff you said earlier. Finnegan expresses little to no emotion with his facial expressions, maybe the occasional ghost of a smile or a frown, but most of the time it's nothing but nonchalant reactions and a blank canvas that decorates his face. He is unable to feel emotions well either, using the excuse that a commander cannot guide his people with a softened core. When it comes to disobedience and foolish ideas, the male has little room for it, and you can easily tell when the male is angered due to the intensity of his glare and how his expression hardens. Anything idiotic is always dealt with, never in the kindest way. He will, with no hesitation, break you either mentally or physically, depending on even the simplest actions you make, but neither choice is less painful than the other. Pride is a major factor with him, and he has copious amounts of it, to the point where one could be considered egotistical. It's also something of a weakness and allows him to be easily manipulable. The male is not quite aloof, but more immersed in the land of ideas and dreams than in reality, which often causes him to snap out of the real world and into one of fantasy. Finn is known to have occasional spontaneous outbursts, each one consisting of a philosophical quote, and the whole group's complete attention on him. He is an odd man with a personality of twists and turns. That's something certain. Biography. Is it not just the most depressing thing one could imagine? The birth of a bright and healthy newborn child to live their life under the guidance of the deranged. The child's mother, a madwoman, under the belief she is a witch and would gladly slaughter anyone that told her otherwise. The father, willingly and eagerly encouraging his wife's behavior and slowly spiraling into insanity inconspicuously. The combination of these two would transform their lively child into one of darkness, exactly like how they raised his previous siblings, teaching them to live a life of no morals and use the dirtiest tricks to satisfy any one of their needs. Of course, it's not as if the heartless psychopaths would care about the well-being of their child, only choosing to feed them and leave them to fend for their own life, learning by experience. Despite the lack of actual involvement in their child's life, his mother actually had the decency to occasionally communicate with her offspring, starting conversations and forming a small bond of mother and son. and also being the one to give her kid their own personal name, the name of Finnegan Artegal Cearbhall. His father played absolutely no part in any of Finnegan's memories or golden moments. Yet, he would save his father instead of his mother if he had the what? Being more of a sperm donor than an actual father, only ever supplying the entire family with spoiled food before directing all of his attention over to his wife, constantly fawning over her beauty and kindness. His siblings weren't the best around either, with his younger brother being a thief and a compulsive liar, his older one killing others as a profession and a way to earn himself wealth. The only decent being, apart from him, was his own twin sister, a bubbly and animated young woman who was the only good thing that came out of this dysfunctional of rejects. To Finnegan, this was absolutely normal behavior, a common occurrence in every household. And we are finally moving on to the final thoughts. I want to let you all know, with the comments Dingo and I added, this document is 18 pages long. Keep in mind, we only added maybe 2 or 3 pages of comments altogether. This thing was 15 pages long.
I hate this guy as a person so much. Like, okay, the writing wasn't the absolute worst. The creator has a good understanding of how to format their bios, except for spacing a paragraph so it isn't a wall. But his character is so unlikable. He's a sociopath that doesn't seem to care about anyone except for a single person. He's killed numerous people. He's possibly sadistic. He murdered his family. He's a deceitful prick who relies on money from lying to people and conning them out of their cash. If you were trying to make him sympathetic, I'm going to be brutally honest. You failed. However, if you were trying to make a character that's easy to hate, then you actually succeeded really well. If that was your intention, good on you. If that wasn't, I'd personally recommend you make a new character instead of trying to fix this guy. He's like 90% flaws and 10% good traits, so fixing him would just be like making a new character anyways. Also, I do not mean to be rude here, but people do not want to read 10 paragraphs for a character's appearance, 2 paragraphs for each of his names, and other tiny bits of information expanded into gargantuan titans of text. A good tip in creating character, remember that only you care about your character more than anyone else.
My main problem lies in the length of this bio. Holy shit. If there's a way you can shorten it, then I would highly suggest doing that. We are all for long bios here, but only when they're filled with necessary information that help the character. A large paragraph explaining each nickname is excessive, not needed, and a bit frustrating for readers because it makes us lose interest fast. Also, I was really interested in the universe you set up, even though I had several questions, but I'm honestly disappointed to see that you don't have more of backstory. This just makes the character feel more lacking. I'm not going to bother repeating every single comment I made in this bio, but just know from a reader and critiquer's perspective, there's a lot that could be changed with this character. Reading through all this bio and seeing all these little things adding up just drives me crazy. I understand if you enjoy the character the way he is, but I do hope you consider some of the changes we pointed out, because especially with a lot of the personality you've given him, there are a lot of things that contradict themselves, and it's a bit angering to read through, especially when you're someone like me who focuses on those things with a character. One last little thing. Dingo ended up putting this bio through a word counter, and if you added in our little critiques, this bio would legally count to be long enough for a novelette. Who needs a bio that long? Anyway, I'm Muffin.
I'm Dingo.
And we are Constructive Criticism. We will see you in the next video. Bye.
Yuji's not supposed to be in this video, but Yuji's making it in this video because she's sitting in the background listening to this bullshit and she's getting upset.
Yep.